All right. I guess even I can't avoid looking back anymore, so let's do that, shall we? Cheers. Yeah, welcome back everybody to me doing a look back at the entire year and maybe even a little of a look forward to 2023. It is Sol Invictus Day, so I don't know, go slay some bulls and stuff. And let's talk about what I did in 2022, my second year on YouTube, BookTube, TubeTube, whatever. And let's have a bit of a chat and see what happened and what changed. So I don't want to go too deeply into like numbers. At the beginning of the year, I thought I would maybe hopefully crack the 1,000 subscribers. That hasn't happened. We're 24, 23, something like that subscribers away from it. But frankly, whatever. On the other hand, I did put out a lot of videos and it was a bit of a rough year, so that's what we'll talk about in detail today. No best of lists because I don't do lists either. All right. But before we'll do that, I want to thank all of my patrons. Yes, I know I usually forget to say that, but thank you from the bottom of my heart to all of you who are actually supporting me on Patreon. I do really mean that. I've had a bit of a rough year, and we'll come back to that in detail later. And there were a couple of months where actually having a couple of bucks on Patreon did, save me a lot of embarrassment, or, well, actually meant that I could buy food without, having to ask friends for money or whatever, because it was kind of rough. So, yeah, I do really, really, really appreciate that. It was not just beer money this year, is what I'm saying. And if you choose to continue supporting me, I do also appreciate that, and I'll try to make things better next year, and maybe I'll have some ideas about that during this video. Once again, thank you, and now let's actually talk about the books and the things that I did this year and where we ended up. See, my first year here was basically me mostly talking about Malazan, and doing MalazTube things, like going through all the published novels by both Stephen Erickson and Cameron Esselmont, and going through them bit by bit and talking about my thoughts and stuff like that, and having some more generic videos on the side, but it was very much Malazan kind of channel. I did start some other series. I did talk about Conan. I did talk about some sword and sorcery. I did talk about Black Company. I did talk about Discworld and stuff like that, but it was mainly a Malazan channel. Now that stopped this year because I didn't really do a lot of Malazan content this year for all kinds of reasons, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well. So I did kind of step away from what you might call MalazTube into what you would call larger BookTube. And we'll definitely look at like whether I felt happy with that or not. I did start the year by reading The Wheel of Time. Now, there's a lot of videos out there. You can go and watch them if you feel like it, or if you have. I salute you and your patience with me. Yeah, I did basically the same thing I did with Malazan before. I just went through all the 14 novels of The Wheel of Time and looked at each of them, my experience going through them. It was really terrible. It was really annoying. The books are really bad. I really don't like them. And that's how I started the year. And I did talk about some individual novels that I read on the weekends to, actually, stay sane, sort of, I guess. And that was fun, and I mean, those books were fun. And when I finished with all of Wheel of Time at the beginning, end of April, early May, did actually go and do 3 videos where I just wrapped up all of Wheel of Time that I wanted to talk about. I originally had 4 in mind, and then I realized that I just couldn't do more Wheel of Time anymore. It was just done with Wheel of Time. But I felt that I have things to say about Wheel of Time that are more general and that might have gotten lost in those daily rants, because they were pretty ranty at some point. And so I went and tried to make those videos more like an overview, and I tried to have more conciliatory language, because I want Wheel of Time fans to listen when I claim that there's issues with the books, because I don't want to tell you to not read those books. I want you to realize what's bad so we don't make those mistakes again in the future. That's part of why I did those, and I tried to be, more understanding, more analytical, and so forth. And I still think those three are some of my better, I don't want to say best, but certainly better thought out videos. And I would say that's roughly where the channel kind of changed already, or where things began to change. Because when I said this is more like, became more of a booktube channel, I did some, reviews, so to speak, or discussions of individual books. But I didn't do like most of the other booktube things. I didn't do TBRs or wrap-ups or anything of that sort. Obviously, I don't buy physical books, so doing book hauls or unhauls doesn't really work that well for me. So that didn't happen. But all the other things, I kind of felt constrained with the booktube format in a way already, which is kind of crazy, right? So I went and did those like more analytical ones. I was happy with what I did there, and then I went and did a video on Orientalism, which I'm another one where I think I did a great job. Well, not a great job in general, but it felt needed, and I felt that I was doing something different or more ambitious than I had done before. Like I did research, I did read a book and stuff like that, and think about what I planned to do there. And that's certainly where I have been trying to go over the summer and autumn and so forth, which, we'll have to talk about all of that. But that's sort of where I would suggest there was a bit of a change in how I approached the channel compared to what I had done before. Because, like, in a way, BookTube or how we do this, like, is very, it kind of runs itself. You never run out of content as long as people publish books. You can just look which books are coming out now. You can look what other, like, booktubers are reading, and then you just, like, make a mix out of all those books and just read those. Do spoiler-free reviews, do, like, a discussion or two with some friends on BookTube that have read the same book, and the rest you fill up with wrap-ups, TBRs, book hauls, and the like. Some tier lists thrown in, and you're basically set. And you can just do that for as long as you want, and that's fine. But that's not how I read. I rarely read, and we'll come to that later again as well. It's like I never read like new release, or rarely read brand new releases. I don't look at like what's coming out next week or next month and look at like the back cover blurbs and like, oh, this sounds interesting, this sounds interesting. That's just not how I work. For weird reasons. So I've talked about that before. So I do like structural stuff in a way. I read structurally. My reading is structured along lines of thought, or whatever you want to call it, that are different. So I need ideas to drive my readings, idea-driven reading, I guess. And that's sort of, I think, what happened after Wheel of Time, right? I went and reread some books with that Orientalist theme going on in them. I reread Declare by Tim Powers. I reread, what's it called, the Merid Audran trilogy by George Alec Effinger, which is a bit of a cyberpunk novel, just to see how other authors portray the Middle East and other things that are often suffering from Orientalist depictions, right? That's what I did then. And it kind of moved on like these connections all over the summer. So that's where I think I turned from like just following the release schedule, what are other people reading kind of booktube thing, into a more weird thing. I'm not going to say it's better or anything, it's just like how it started working for me. And part of that is trying to connect those things and then draw some larger thing out of it, because that's how I in general operate in life. It's like I take in a lot of information and then I try to make some connections and make some general statements out of it. I don't know why that is. And that's sort of where I ended up going over the summer, which is why I went and read The Secret History, because it was mentioned on the back cover of Babel, and I wanted to talk about Babel, so I wanted to know what I was talking about. So I reread that and, moved from there to there to there to there. And I think that's kind of what happened there. And the summer generally meant that I was slowing down when it came to making videos in a lot of ways, but also became more focused, which is, I guess, when we need to talk about Dan Simmons. I don't even know exactly when I started this Dan Simmons thing. Like, it's been something I've been thinking about a lot before, and I was like, yeah, I know Hyperion is super popular on BookTube, and everyone's like, hey, it's one of the best science fiction books ever. That's next to Dune, the most important thing ever. And I had read it before, like several times. Like, this was literally my 4th time reading Hyperion this year, right? And I felt differently, and I'm like, I also had read the other books, and I had come all the way to Flashback. I remember the Flashback being really, really bad, and I'm like, I guess we need to do the thing and look at all of them again to maybe tell everyone else why things are bad. And I come to that again as well, because that's not what I want to do. So I went and started reading Hyperion, and I came up with this whole idea that I have called like the downfall of Dan Simmons, which is almost done now. Over the last months, I think I started in September, something like that. So it took a long time, because I really slowed down in everything over the last couple of months, and we'll go there as well. See, my idea was to look at how Dan Simmons' books have changed over time, how Dan Simmons as a writer has changed over time, and why I think he's still so highly regarded in large parts of the science fiction, fantasy, BookTube community in a way. And I'm like, we need to figure that out, because maybe that says more about us than it says about Dan Simmons, I guess. And yeah. That's how I started that series, and overall, I'm very happy. I did 6 videos on those. They were all very long, and I think I'm not gonna say that I'm really good at that or whatever, but I feel like I managed to give a new view, or a different view, perspective on these books compared to what other parts of BookTube are doing. It obviously is like a very political lens, but I think that's needed for these kind of books, because books and art are tied into society in a lot of ways. So that's one huge thing that I did over the last couple of months. Probably the big thing, the driving thing. I've obviously talked about other books that I read on the way that I felt compelled to talk about, because when I find a book that I'm reading and I'm just like, wow, this is awesome, I need to talk about it, then I'll do that. Like when I read A Brief History of 7 Killings, or when I read, well, now obviously the 2 new McCarthy books. So, but that's I think the next part of the evolution of my evolution here is basically that the Dan Simmons thing, and me making like an overarching series of videos that follow something of an arc. Because it is, well, it's a downward spiral, I would say. It's a trajectory downwards, but it is still an arc. It's like we'll go through them in time, and we'll look at them in publication order, and we'll see where that leads us, and what we can actually extrapolate from it. Because it's not just like this book okay, this book bad, this book really bad, and this book terrible. I want to look at something beyond that, and I think that's where the Dan Simmons thing is something of a catalyst, I guess. And then we ended up with the big project, the anti-Semitism project that I'm still working on. And I hope I'll be done with it by the end of the year. That's sort of like my last goal for the year, to actually finish that. I'm not sure if I can really manage that, because, time and stuff. But if not, it'll be out in like the first week of January, basically. And that's like the next step in that evolution. It's closer to the Orientalism video. It's more about like the genres that we're talking about, fantasy and science fiction as literature, as it connects to the world, and why that's a problem or not a problem, where to go from there. So that's something that I started in like the autumn. Like I've been thinking about it before. Obviously mentioned like the anti-Semitic stereotypes in what's it called, Wheel of Time and stuff. But I felt there was more, and I had some conversation with all kinds of different people and realized that a lot of people are not aware of a lot of these elements. And like, maybe we need to actually talk about that in a larger context. And I think that's sort of where I see the channel going next year. And I certainly struggle with that a lot, and we'll talk about that in a moment as well. But it's like where things kind of come together. So I started doing the research and reading a lot of books and actually working almost academically on the whole thing. And that's the end of the year. Yes, I did talk about Cormac McCarthy. I did talk about Discworld, and I had no things kept those things running. But I feel like my heart has moved on beyond BookTube, because see, there's a video in fact that I did in the autumn, I think, about like how BookTube has changed. Now we stopped reading and learn to love the book, and I still feel strongly about that. And I think I made the right video there. I probably just didn't go far enough, and I feel like I'm no longer part of BookTube in that regard. Because see, I think that's what I came to realize this year. I care about books, I care about literature, and I care about art. I think they are important for what we do and to make us human. They are how we make sense of the world and how we, continue, surviving. They fulfill a lot of functions for humanity at large, and I care deeply about them. And I also care deeply about how we actually interact with them, how we talk about them, how we view them, how we consume them, how we think about them, how all of these things. I care deeply. It really matters. The problem is, once it matters, it also means that if you see something go wrong, and if I see something go wrong, I have this inner drive to talk about it and to change things, to make things better, because this shit's important, I guess. And that's sort of what I realized over this year. And it's like, when you go back and look at stuff that I did first year, right, you can tell that. You can tell that already when I talk about all the philosophical implications of a chapter of Malazan Book of the Fallen or something. It's like, that stuff's always been there. It just has come more to the forefront this year. When I moved back from just Malazan and looked at like fantasy and science fiction at large, I was like, yeah, well, there's more to this, and I need to address these things holistically. And there's a lot of problems with that, of course, because, I'm just a guy. I'm not necessarily an authority on anything. So while I like to preach and while I like to teach, and I think that's part of where I feel going with this, in a more educational direction in general, I need to overcome my inner, feelings of inadequacy for that. But that's where I'm going, because I want to be a better reader. I want to be a better understander of literature in general, of fantasy, of science fiction, as a lens to look at the world and, make the world a better place. Because action has to follow our cogitation, so to speak. And I'll try to go further down that road next year. I will still continue reading fantasy and sci-fi, of course, because that's what I love. And I still go into all kinds of other directions, but I want to go more into the general thing. We'll see how the anti-Semitism video goes. But there's stuff that I can add to the conversation, because I studied philosophy, I've studied medieval history. I can add things here that other people maybe can't, because they don't have that kind of background. So maybe that's what I want to do. And I realized when I started working on the anti-Semitism material, I enjoy reading academic knowledge and, making these abstractions and turning them into an ongoing, not a narrative, but, condensing it down to something that I can then tell you all about, because I'm excited about it now. I want to go down that route some more. So that's certainly where things will go next year. What else? I will certainly, I did a first live stream. I want to get more interactive, because I've said that before, talking to people is important to me. And having direct feedback and questions is something that I personally really, really need to keep going. So maybe I'll do more live streams down that route. We will see. So I guess let's look at some of the other books that I just haven't mentioned in a cluster of things that I wish more people had read this year, and things that I will read next year, where I know that I'll read them next year, and maybe even videos that I kind of might do next year. So let's start with things I wish people had read this year. Well, basically, Eversion and Neom. That's the two big ones. Eversion by Alistair Reynolds is a fantastic sci-fi novel, and I wish more people had read it. It really is that good. Go read it. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. Neom by Lavi Tidar is sad and emotional and witty and all kinds of wonderful things packed in a really tight, small novel, almost a novella, and look, it's got Robot Messiah in it. It's brilliant. People should read it. I really wish more people would read that kind of stuff so we can talk about it. But yeah, that's the two big ones that are new that I read this year for the first time because they got published this year, and I'm like, yeah, you need to read that. Beyond that, beyond fantasy and science fiction, I would say go read China Miéville's Introduction to the Communist Manifesto. If you have never looked into the Communist Manifesto, it might just be the thing that you need. Set you straight on that regard. Go do that. It's a really good book in that regard. I loved it. And I don't know, go read The Passenger, read Stella Maris, and read A Brief History of Seven Killings. That's the books that moved me this year. That's the book that really made me think, that made me appreciate what books can do, what the power that books and literature have. That's the ones. Well, and of course, the World We Make by N.K. Jemisin, because it's N.K. Jemisin and it's brilliant. But I guess me rereading the 5th season and the Broken Earth trilogy earlier kind of overshadowed that in my appreciation, but it was still great. And if you're looking for 2022 releases, then yeah, go read The World We Make. But beyond that, that's the books that moved me, the books that made me think, that made me go above and beyond. Same goes for nonfiction. It was certainly, both The Dawn of Everything by David Graeber and David Wengrow, which I really, really enjoyed and appreciated. I even gave it as a Christmas gift to my mother. So there's that. And the other one was certainly the Bicameral Mind book by Julian Jaynes, which is a bit weird, but I like weird stuff. So there we go. So what happened this year? I started out trying to do normal booktube, realized it didn't work, and started doing more like meta-level booktube videos, talking about genres like neuromance, like cyberpunk, talking about issues like Orientalism or other problematic elements in fantasy fiction, and started working on a more or less historical video that will obviously have implications on fantasy and science fiction. Where will all of this go next year? I doubt I will do something like the Wheel of Time read-along thing again. I do, however, have a list of authors that I really want to read. Guy Gavriel Kay is the one that's on top of that. I wanted to start reading Guy Gavriel Kay this year in May, and then I just couldn't get up the energy after finishing Wheel of Time. So that's gonna happen no matter what. I'll read Guy Gavriel Kay in publication order. Will I do videos on it? Possibly. What kind of videos? I have no idea. What else? Maror by Lavi Tidor. The audiobook gets pushed back again and again and again, and I'm going to read that book because I want to read that book so bad. So that's going to happen, and maybe I'll talk about it. We'll see. Beyond that, there seems to be a new Matt Ruff book, which may or may not be a follow-up to Lovecraft Country. If that happens, I'll read it. And if Marlon James manages to actually finish his Dark Star trilogy next year in 2023, I'll read that. Above that, I've watched a lot of releases to look forward to in 2023, and yeah, I know basically none of those books, and the ones that I knew the names of, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to read that shit. It's sad, but I feel like I have moved off into a very, very unique trajectory, leaving the galaxy that is BookTube behind, and I'm striking out into the dark somewhere, and I have no idea what's going to happen there. Yeah, once the final Austin Art book is out by Ted Williams, I'll probably reread the first trilogy, and then go and read the rest. We will see. But beyond that, that's my reading plans. Everything else, it'll just happen when it happens. Video-wise, we'll see. So the anti-Semitism video hopefully will come out this year. And depending on how that one does, whether people really appreciate me doing these deep dives, I might do some more in that regard. Mostly on stuff where I can, add my knowledge and my history knowledge and philosophical knowledge and use that to explain stuff that's going on. There's more down that direction, definitely, and I would love to do more of that sort. There's another project that I've been thinking about a lot, and we'll see how that goes. See, I've seen other booktubers, I've seen booktubers do videos on like the history of fantasy or the history of science fiction. And I've always come back from those videos very dissatisfied. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. You missed out this, you missed out that, you missed out the other thing. And I'm like, yeah. If you do a 20-minute video, you have to leave out a ton of stuff. It has to be very simple and surface level. And I get it. So, yeah. Then there were sometimes situations where I'm like, yeah, you just don't know shit about the subject you're talking about. And that's me being an arrogant asshole, but that's the kind of person I am. So I might be, I've been thinking about that. I just want to do it right. I might be doing something along the sort of, that's like a history, a series of videos going through the history of fantastic literature. Possibly one on fantasy and then moving on towards science fiction. We will see. That's something I would like to do, and I would go like era by era, maybe read a bunch of, classics from that era or whatever. Possibly have a discussion where we get like an expert on for that, specific era if we can find someone. Actually make it more like a university lecture in a way. Maybe have a bit of a series of books that people could read if they want to read along. And just maybe, I'm still making this up as I go along, right? I thought about it this year today when I was out writing. Anyway, the point is, have a list of books and then maybe have for the people that are really interested, have a Patreon discussion where we talk about those additional reading kind of books, and like, hey, did you read that chapter, that whatnot, to go through that and figure out how to, what else we can learn from that, to actually make it sort of a course through the history of fantasy, all the way from the early beginnings to today, or as close to today as we can get, and just have these resources. And the videos would definitely be up, and the Patreon thing would just be, for $1 patrons and up, and we'll just sit down for a Zoom meeting or whatever, video call, and go through the whole the additional reading, sort of like an additional tutorial sort of thing. That's something I had in mind. I need to work out the details. I need to make sure it all makes sense, but it's something that I thought about today while I was sitting on a horse in the middle of a forest. I'm like, hey, that would be really cool. Yeah. Those are mostly the plans. What else? I would like to reread the Culture series by Ian M. Banks. We'll see if I can do that, but that's one that I really want to reread because it's great, and we need to have more discussion of Ian M. Banks on the internet. So that'll happen, I guess, hopefully. And yeah. Beyond that, see, yesterday I was riding my horse, not my horse, but it's my mother's horse, but anyway, and I ran into a tree and it hit me in the face and I fell off the horse, which is why I gained this wonderful rakish scar here. And that kind of is very much the message of this year, right? I started out with a lot of great plans, and then in summer I got hit by something out of left field, which is mostly me burning out and falling really deep into depression and trying to scramble my way out of it, which I have not done yet. I have a shitload of things to do, to set right with people and so forth. We'll need to make all of that work, and I hope I can get there next year. But yeah, it's very much a symbol for this year. And what I did yesterday is obviously I got up and got back in the saddle and rode on, and that's great. And that's what I'm trying right now. I'm not sure if I'll succeed. I'll certainly keep you informed along the way. I'm really glad for all of you who actually watched any of the videos this year. I'm glad once again for, the bigger booktubers, YouTubers that asked me on the channel, Philip, Joanna, Jimmy Nuts. It was an absolute honor and pleasure to be there, and I'm thankful for that. I'll try to do the same with smaller creators if I can. I'll keep on going that. It was great to have Stephen Erickson chime into a discussion in the comments about my video on Rejoice and the stuff about the culture and scarcity. That was brilliant. I really appreciated that. Thank you for that. It made my day at the time, even though I was in a tent at Wacken Open Air. And yeah, I hope things will get better next year for me and for you and for everyone. The world's certainly not been a fun place the last couple of years. Let's hope things get better. Let's get back into the saddle and yeah. happy Sol Invictus, and go get them bulls. And I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.